Yeah, really great. Thanks, Paul. Good to see you both. Nice to see you, Rebekah.
Oh, it's lovely to be here. I'm joining you from Dunedin this time round. I normally live in Hamilton, but I'm down south visiting various other kaupapa. So they very kindly made sure I'm like, I need a room. I've got a very important interview. Please make sure I get here.
How cold is it down there?
Oh, I think it might snow on Sunday, and the temperature just dropped this afternoon. It was quite nice this morning, and then you could just feel it mid-afternoon, boom, freezing.
Don't envy you.
Hey, look, I just want to start by asking the both of you. You first, Rebekah. What was your initial reaction on the announcement yesterday morning?
Oh, it was, you know how you think sometimes, because we're in August.
Yeah.
And it's about a bit of a war on disabled people and families.
Yeah.
And then it lulled, and you think, oh, you hear this rumours of an announcement, and you think, surely it can't get any worse. And then it all just drops, bombshell after bombshell after bombshell, and you're thinking, oh, good grief. Oh, good Lord. This is rough.
Yeah. And for you, Nick? Your first.
Yeah, thank you, Blake, and I appreciate your thoughts on this, Rebekah. I kind of had a couple of days warning on this one. I sort of heard all of the rumors going around and had some time to gather myself. But I'd been involved in the DPO movement since the early 2000s and been amongst those that had really agitated and shouted and jumped up and down to have a disabled person's ministry, a Whaikaha. We had it in our minds and we knew exactly what we wanted. So when the announcement dropped, it was pretty dark actually on Thursday. It was a really sort of, I sort of knew what was coming, but still to have it drop was really quite devastating actually, because so many people had worked for so long to get that announcement out, to get that ministry stood up, and to have that all be pretty much gutted in one day in a 30-minute press conference was really hard. You know, it really kind of felt like a kick in the guts and just a real step backwards for how the many thousands of people will receive support and how we do disability in our country. And so, it's kind of taking a little while to settle in, but yeah, it was a tough day for sure.
When they made the announcement yesterday, I'm kind of curious as to how fast you got feedback from people and what that feedback was.
I think for our community, we're still kind of in a state of shock, trying to figure out, well, what does this mean? What does this mean? Like, they say that there's no immediate change. Cool. But what does this mean for us long term? And there's been no answers to that. And I think that really is where a lot of people are, certainly from our community as parents, are right now trying to figure out what will this mean? What will the impacts be? And the answers to that have been very non-existent.
Yeah. I think I just want to bring back a couple of days to the announcements around the beneficiary, the cuts to our benefits. They were messaged really quite awfully, and there was so much. What does this mean for me? How is this going to impact me? And just fast forward a couple of days to Thursday, there was so much of the minister messaging there's going to be no immediate impact to service. So I think there was an acknowledgement that people were going to be feeling really confused.
and the
I
audio.
think your microphone's playing up a little bit there,
So
Nick.
it's a very confusing time, that's for sure.
Yeah. Actually, Rebekah, you're doing a lot of work around that poverty field as well. What's your interpretation of how MSD is going to incorporate these changes and the impact that that's going to have on the disabled community?
Oh boy,
Is it
do
a
I have
positive
thoughts
thing?
about that? I'm just going to be really blunt here.
Go for it.
Look, thank you. Look, we are under a government that is rapidly implementing austerity. We are under a government that is being incredibly cruel and bringing back the cruelest part of sanctions and benefits. And they are using languaging that is incredibly soft around it. So they're softening it. They're making it sound very reasonable. They're making it sound very sensible. But particularly disabled people are incredibly good at looking past that spin at what it really means. And what it means is that disabled people are on job seekers, so they are going to be subject to incredibly cruel sanctions. Even disabled people who are on supported living are not going to be exempt from this and are going to be subject to it. There is no accountability for wins or work and income in terms of making sure that this kind of information is presented in accessible formats, to making sure that information gets to people on time. There is zero accountability for work and income to make sure that people are aware of their obligations. It's vague. Nobody knows what these activities are. Nobody knows what is going to be expected of them. Nobody knows what these so-called obligations are. And now this very ministry that has been so awful to disabled people in the past. And again, I want to make the point, disabled people and their families have long memories. We know how MSD treated us in the past. We know their cruelty. We know their harshness. And now suddenly we're expected to believe that this ministry that implemented cruelty against disabled people has radically changed and radically transformed and will now magically support disabled people. I don't think so. And that disingenuity is, I think, for me anyway, the core of the anger of how dare you expect us to swallow your spin and agree with you and take you on trust when we know how awful this very ministry has been to us in the past, and now suddenly we're expected to engage in a high trust model and share our personal details and talk about our needs. Like, it's cruel, it's appalling, and it's incredibly disingenuous.
So, what are your hopes that if we are able to do some advocating that we can encourage this government to do from the opposition side?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one of the biggest flaws around what's happened so far has been that disabled people haven't been involved in any of the consultation around any of the decisions that have been taking place here. And I think that's been one of the real problems with this decision. And so from my perspective, there's been a long promised phase 2 of this process. And if you look at some of the documentation, it talks about phase 2 is at the moment paused, but will hopefully be implemented. And I think that's really where we need to lean in as a wider disability community, as disabled people, as our allies, as our wider network of families, whānau, and allies, to really demand that we have our voice heard. That was one of the biggest real points of pushback. DPA mentioned it in their press release that came out on Thursday, that there was no disability voice in the review. And I think so that for me, that's where we really need to have our voice heard very strongly, that in any future or in any next stage of the review, because there has to be one, because EGL has been put on pause. Goodness knows what that means. And I think we need to be really aware of what that means, that disabled people are at the table around that consultation to have our voice heard, because at the moment, up until now, we haven't had our voice heard. And the nothing about us without us, I come from the DPO movement, that nothing about us without us was fundamental to everything that we did. And this government has just totally abandoned that. They've just walked away from that commitment to engage with disabled people around this consultation, this review. They've just walked away from that and done what they want to do. And for me, that's why the other day, it was on Friday, I just felt a huge moment of solidarity with Māori when they did what they did to Te Arawhiti. I just said, wow, like, here we are, they're just doing what they need to do in order to save money. So for me, I was like, here we are, so we're going to have to just really stand up and be very strong in our advocacy to demand to be at the table through our representative organizations and through our points of advocacy. Otherwise, they're just going to keep doing what they have to do, or what they feel like they want to do.
And
So, Rebekah, you can do your rant now if you want.
Sorry.
Always up for it.
Yeah.
Like, you were saying something.
I was going to ask another question. What do you think people have to do? Then you can do a double rant.
I think people, like, this is a political occurrence. Like, it's very clearly politically driven. If you read the full review, it's very clearly driven by a need to reduce the cost of disability services. And I think what we need to do is we need to acknowledge that A, this is politically driven, but B, respond politically. So write to your MP, outline to your MP exactly what this means, the fear, the worry, the concern, the reduction in supports. I know that's an extra burden on everybody. That's the last thing we feel like doing. But writing to our MP, writing to our ministers is very clearly says, this is not acceptable. We're not happy. I'm going to circle back to, oh, sorry, that's a terrible phrase, circle back. Who uses that? Me, apparently. To something Nick said. And I'm going to go back to, if you read the full report, there's some very unpleasant hooks that are buried in the report. And one of the hooks, if you look at the concluding comments, it says, I'm going to quote it directly, the reviewers are uncomfortable about the continued operation of the NASC-based system of needs assessment alongside 3 long-standing EGL trials. This needs to be addressed. The continuing coexistence of these very 2 different forms of DSS is confusing and muddled and results in inequities in the services and supports being provided to clients. The EGL principles are worth giving effect to, but a revised approach needs to be developed. And what that tells me, because that has not been included in the recommendations, nobody is admitting to this in any of the press I've seen. What that tells me is that this government and this minister want to completely decimate EGL in terms of an approach, in terms of a funding, in terms of a disability support, and they want to take us all back 20 years to that very patriarchal, patronising NASC-based system of you have this and you have this and you have this and you can spend your money here and here and here and that's it. And that gives me the shits, man.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on what Rebekah was saying. I took that for that same comment from the report, and the other phrase that really gave me the shivers was the primacy of natural supports. And when you read that in the report, that really gave me the fear of God, to be honest, because we went to court many times to argue over what that means. For the government was trying to say that families of disabled people with severe disabilities should be providing natural supports and shouldn't be funded for the funded family care, and they lost many times over. And now the government is coming back and saying that natural supports should be in primacy over funded supports such as flexible supports and also EGL. So we've got some massive arguments coming up here about EGL, and about flexible funding and about individualized funding. So there's some things in here that really could turn your hair grey if that's a problem for you. So I read this report, and it really makes me very concerned.
One of the things I noticed yesterday during the press conference is that it kind of felt, listening to what they were saying, and Louise Upson is very well versed at giving bad news with a smile. She seems to enjoy it. But it felt very much like this is an idea and a ministry that was set up not that long ago and not given enough chance to succeed. And I'm a fully able-bodied person, so I know I come at this with a really different perspective to people who are in the community. But am I misreading that?
I think that Louise is a very competent minister, and she has skated over very well that disability support services have not been funded properly for the last decade, possibly the last 2 decades. So when disability support was in health has a large enough budget that it would just simply rearrange a few things and it would make it work. And she has very carefully and elegantly, I'll give her credit, skated over that there is increasing need for disability support services because we have an ageing population. We have increased number of survivors from what used to be fatal events. I'm talking stroke, things like that, which you would once die from. You now have people who survive, which is fantastic. But there is a need for ongoing disability support. We have babies being born prematurely who now survive, and that also comes with additional support. And we have an increase in population. So, of course, when you have an increase in population, part of that is an increase in disabled people. So all of that has been happening apace for at least the last 10, probably the last 20 years. But disability support funding has not kept pace with our population. And we as a country, or the government, has quite conveniently skipped past that reality into, oh no, we're just being fiscally responsible. Oh no, Whaikaha, let's blame Whaikaha because they were set up too quickly and they didn't really have the tools and they're a little bit incompetent. Instead of going, actually, as a country, we've never grappled with the fact that we have consistently underfunded disabled people and their families. We have expected families to cover this gap. We have expected carers to give freely of their time and their energy to meet the need. And we have not supported people in the way they need to be. And we have not provided supports in the way they need to be because, I don't know, we want to give money to landlords. We want to give money to tobacco companies. We want to give money to tax cuts.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I mean, I read the subtext of the announcement on Thursday as really a political hit job, and that was to, if you go back and you look at what happened with the DSS. There were ups and downs throughout the last 10 years, but it went back further than that. It probably goes back the last 30 years, to be honest. And every year, the ups and the downs would be funded, and no one would make a big fuss out of it. They'd just top up to meet the need because there was need there. No one would argue that there wasn't need there. And that's just what happened because it was within the overall Ministry of Health budget. Now that it's been surfaced and placed, now that it was surfaced and placed into Whaikaha, it gets put into the spotlight, and that's when it becomes an issue, and that's when it becomes something that you can spotlight and therefore make into an opportunity to make political hay out of, which is what we saw on Thursday. So I just feel really sorry for the staff at Whaikaha and the leadership team at Whaikaha, who I know worked incredibly hard. Everyone saw that. It's not up for debate. Who were really not well served by the reports and all of the things that were said. It's just not in question that disability supports are underfunded. They are, and they need to be more comprehensively funded. We need to have a proper conversation as a country about how we fund disabled people, families, and whānau. And we haven't had that conversation ever about how we do it properly, how we direct that funding, what mechanism we do it by. That's why EGL is so important, because it creates a mechanism and a set of principles to start driving the funding. But the funny thing about that is that National started that policy and that framework, and now they're undoing it. So as a disabled person, I don't really understand why they're coming back and redoing and effectively killing a policy that they supported in the first place. So it makes no sense to me, other than a short-term political win for a government that's looking for wins at the moment. So I on a political level, I'm just astonished that you would effectively punch down again on a community that can't really fight for itself. It's just really, you can't, you've got no words for it.
And unfortunately, I think a lot of it comes back to the fact that there's a lot of influence from Mr. Peters and David Seymour. So I do wonder if this was a single national government, whether they would have gone this far, going back to Nick's point about they set up some of the policies. So I wonder if there's a lot of influence there from Mr. Peters and from Mr. Seymour, that why this has gone so deep.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know, but at the end of the day, this is a national-led government. So Luxon is the PM, and because he is the PM and because it's national-led, it is up to National and Luxon to say no, and they are saying yes. So that tells me they are supporting, whether we want to agree with it or not. At the moment, National are going along with this, so they are supporting all of these horrors that ACT and NZ First are bringing in. They're not saying no. They're not saying we disagree. They're not saying, National are not saying absolutely not, we don't support this. They're rolling over and going, oh, okay, then it'll be fine. And I think National and Luxon need to be held to account for that.
Yeah. Do you mind if I go again, Paul?
Go for it.
So 2 points here. So do you think that the review was done by a few more national friends? And do you think that there needs to be a lot more petitions and stuff like we have seen from myself in recent times?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one, Blake. I don't know about the connections between the review process and the party. I just assume it went out in the normal way that these things do. I don't know about that side of it. But in terms of the response, I mean, my suggestion is to flood the inboxes of National Party MPs and ministers every day on this issue, because there's one thing I know, having worked inside the Parliament, there's one thing that really drives ministers absolutely crazy. It's multiple emails every day on a single topic. It just drives them absolutely crazy. It drives them bonkers. So I'd encourage every single disabled person listening, every family member of a disabled person, all of us to start flooding their email box just every day.
And it's super easy to find the emails if anyone's wondering. It's all on the Parliament website.
Because they just hate it. They absolutely hate it.
And the other thing too, and the actual review itself, and this does my head in. The actual review itself acknowledges as a risk that there is a risk of quality of care being provided may erode. But they go on to say, but that's okay, people can complain. I'm like, what the hell? It does my head in. And then it talks about other risks like, there's a risk because the expectations of the disability community are high and the relationship with the government has been eroded. So any communications need to be really clear. And I'm like, you don't understand why that trust has been eroded. That trust has been eroded because you guys decided that we weren't important. You guys decided that as family members, our well-being didn't matter anymore, that we could just do this work for free without support. And too bad if we had a mentee B on the way. No worries. That's health's problem if you have a mentee B. It's not disability support, so all good. There's such a lack of care for our well-being as individuals, as family members, as a community. I haven't encountered this ever before.
Right, I've got a question here from somebody in the chat that I don't know the answer to, but all three of you probably have a better answer than I could provide on this one. Are there any places on here or other social media channels that have more conversations like this around disability in New Zealand? I only usually get recommended overseas ones. That's from Tawhiti, who I should also thank for the super chat before. I think that's my first ever super chat, so thank you.
All right.
It's a great question, Tawhiti. I know that there are plenty of private Facebook or messenger chats groups that certainly have a very active chat culture around them. And yeah, I don't know how we'd make them available. I think people generally value their privacy quite highly, especially at the moment. There's a lot of, what I would say is there's a lot of disabled people in the community that are really quite fearful of the changes that have been taking place. So there's a lot of communication going on underground, if you like. So people are doing a lot of talking, but in protected and private spaces. Because people really don't want to put their head up above the parapet, as it were. And the people who you are seeing in putting comments out in media or online are really people that feel comfortable and confident to do so.
Yeah, or like in my case, I have a job with parents of vision impaired, and that job protects me in a way that this sort of conversation is part of my job. And so my employers support what I'm saying. They absolutely back my perspectives, and that gives me the ability to come here and say this without being afraid that my funding will get cut or my employers will get their funding cut. To me. And that gives me a privilege. And I'm really aware that a lot of people don't have that privilege. And when you don't have that privilege, it makes it harder to be able to publicly speak out because you're more vulnerable. You're more vulnerable to abuse, but you're also more vulnerable to having your funding cut, to all of those difficulties that come. And I'm incredibly thankful for the opportunities that I have. And I do take that responsibility super seriously because I know that not everybody gets that opportunity.
My advice would be, and thank you for the question, if you don't find any groups, make one yourself, because the more that we can have here is the better.
I think that's brilliant. I love that advice. It's brilliant advice. All right, I got another one here for you then. Who are the main ministers to email on the disability BS? This one's from Andy Rennie.
So I would...
Go, Rebekah. Yeah.
I would always start with your local MP, because your local MP is who is elected to represent you in Parliament. And it doesn't matter what flavour, whether they're National Act, Labour, Whaikaha. they are there as your elected representative. And it always pays when you're emailing your local MP to say that you are part of their electorate, that they are your elected members. So they know you live there. They know that it's part of your role to represent them. So that is where I start. And then secondly, the minister would be Louise Upston, and that would be probably the most effective use of your time, as far as my perspective is.
Yeah, from my perspective, I'd also start emailing the Minister of Finance, just to because ultimately all of the decisions around funding begin and end in the Treasury. So from my perspective, I'd be starting to email the Nicola Willis's office, because this is ultimately a decision around saving money. So that decision has come from Treasury at some point, and at the direction of our finance minister. I don't know if there's any point in emailing our prime minister, but you could probably add him to the list.
You could probably just flick him a message on TikTok. He spends so much time on there.
Yeah.
And I can't talk. I spend too much time on TikTok as well, but yeah.
Yep.
And hey, if anyone shares this with them, they're welcome on the show any Friday night.
Yeah. Yep. Anytime they want. Kiwi Boob actually makes this suggestion as well about making sure you have a chat with your MPs, your local MPs, because they're paid to interact with you and to listen to your concerns. And most MPs will have some kind of public forum where you can go out and meet them, like an event or a drop-in centre or something like that. So definitely worth hunting down who your local MP is as well for that kind of thing.
And I know too, I just want to admit that sometimes it doesn't feel like you get listened to. And I want to acknowledge that. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't stop emailing or commenting or pushing or advocating. But I do get how frustrating it is when you email your local MP and you just hear crickets back.
Yeah, I can't say I have that problem anymore.
I have a couple more questions to ask while we're still here. So you talked earlier about the benefit announcement earlier this week. How demoralising is it, because this ties in as well, that our Prime Minister was literally smiling and Louise was literally smiling this week when they both went to make their various announcements around budgets and benefits, I beg your pardon, and disability. How demoralising is that for the community? I know it was for health.
Yeah, it was fucking cruel, and excuse my French, but I couldn't believe it. Like to stand there and go, oh, I don't know, and then do that little laugh. And I'm like, how can you not know? How can you not care? It is literally your job to care about the populace. And this, oh, I don't know. I just thought it was incredibly dismissive and cruel. And I took my breath away. I just was absolutely gobsmacked with such a callous response.
Yeah. I mean, I was looking at that on two levels, and the first level was, it was a bloody disgrace, to walk in there and have a smile on your face, and just be, really pleased, like you're doing something really good. It was great. It was a great thing. They were slapping each other on the back and saying, "Didn't we do a great job?" But on the other level, I was just sitting there reminding myself of, the fact, that there are so many people out there that, like, half the people on Job Seeker have a health condition and disability. So to come out there and actually talk about how this is not going to impact disabled people is just absolute garbage. This is a sanction that's specifically targeting disabled people. So it's just galling. It's absolutely appalling that to come out there with a smile on your face and to not have the numbers, to not have the facts and figures at your fingertips, which you should do. I mean, you're being paid a lot of money to be doing the job, and you should have the numbers at your fingertips. Yeah, it impacts real people in an unbelievable way. It tips people's lives upside down completely. It just showed the complete lack of understanding of real people and their lives and the impact it has on real people's lives. It just showed for me that just the complete lack of empathy and understanding for real people's lives. So yeah, it was pretty tough to watch. Yeah, it just gobsmacked.
Do you think they got the tone right?
Don't let me get too far into this because it'll just make.
Do you think they got the tone right for yesterday's announcement then, or do you sit there going, "We know you were fucking smiling when you did this to the people on benefits"?
I mean, the fact that these are people who are paid at least 3 times what I'm paid, so they are paid very well. They have a staff far more than what I have, probably 10 times more staff than what I have. I have one part-time staff who does 5 hours a week. So, and they can't get the details right at their fingertips. And they're fronting up to media and they don't have this information to hand. They can't tell us this detail. So either they haven't done the work, they haven't actually properly sorted it out, or they don't care. Those are the 2 options as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I guess what I was really disappointed by, especially with the Minister Upston's media round yesterday, was that, she literally said a couple of times when asked, "Oh, don't worry, I'll help to get the disabled people into work," when most of them can't work.
Yeah, and it was really galling for me because she had been in a meeting that I was chairing and she had, said all these things and we're going, oh, okay, this sounds really great. And then literally not even a week later, she's fronting up and going, no, we're stripping Whaikaha, we're putting it all into MSD, we haven't consulted with any disabled people, we haven't consulted with any family, we might talk to you soon if you're lucky, but and actually it'll be fine, don't worry. And I'm like, you have no idea what is happening in our lives. Like you say, nothing has changed, but you have just increased exponentially the uncertainty. And we've already had uncertainty with March. We're already worried about what's happening. And now you're shifting our funding into MSD, who is known to be cruel to disabled people and families, who is knowing to deny us our entitlements, who is knowing to be absolutely appalling in the name of saving money, even though we all know it'll cost 10 times more in 3 years. How can you be paid this much money and be this ignorant?
Anything else from you, Paul?
Well, I've got another question here from the chat. How can we get the centre-right leaning population to realise all this?
I mean, I think this is I think people. I mean, most people I talk to are good, decent humans. Most people will really experience disability at some point in their life, whether through aging or through connection to a family member. So this is not an issue that you can park in a box and say this doesn't relate to me. I feel like there is some form of othering of this issue, like it doesn't relate to me. It's not something that I'll ever have to deal with. But I feel like this is an issue in terms of disability related matters that will impact on everyone in their lifetime in some way or another, either through their personal experience, through aging, or through a connection to someone they know or a family member. So I feel like everyone's got skin in this game, regardless. And I feel like we just need to do a better job at communicating that fact and just getting people involved in these issues. And because there is a bit of othering of this, and we do tend to be a little bit insular within our community for just survival reasons. I mean, there's so much going on that we just have to protect ourselves from events like March and events like this week. But I feel like when we do go out to the general public, there, like I was just thinking about EGL. I was thinking about if we took EGL out to the general community and we asked people, would there be support for the payment of supports for disabled people? I think you would get most people saying, "Yep, actually, yep, we're in for that." So I feel like government is off track on this one when they're starting to cut back on the payment of supports for disabled people. I feel like there are other things that they really should be focusing on first. I think this is an issue that will impact a lot of people throughout their lifetime. And I think in terms of public support, that they're really offbeat on this one. Coming after disabled people is not a good look. It doesn't poll well. If we were to poll this one, it wouldn't come back well. And I just think we need to really start reaching out to our communities and just spreading out that community of interest a little wider, and just seeing what comes back.
What I would add is I really liked what I don't know if either of you listened to it. What Patrick Gower said on Radio New Zealand yesterday, I believe it was, that he believes we need a disability party, and that's something I'd be keen to see happen. I don't know whether it'll happen in my lifetime, but that'd be something I'd like to see.
Take your own advice, Blake, and start one.
I think it's worth mentioning that the social investment model is a centre-right model. And it was National who actually implemented a social investment model, and it was National who implemented an Enabling Good Lives model. And so there is already a very strong history with the centre-right of intervening early and preventative intervention in order to save money down the track, that social investment model. And it is quite devastating to see this current government absolutely trash what has been a really good track record with disability.
Yeah. Any final comments from you, Paul?
I'm just enjoying the conversation and reading the comments that are coming through. There's some fantastic stuff that's coming through here. And it seems pretty clear that people just aren't happy with this decision. Like it feels reactionary and it feels pointed. And that's not a good thing. And we can't even poll to see how people think about these things because David Farrar stopped being a member of the polling organization because apparently he was doing dodgy things they didn't like. So I guess we'll never know. I know. I've been keeping track actually of the polls throughout the year. And one of the things I found really interesting was his was the only poll that consistently put ACT on 9%. Everybody else had it around 7%. I'm like, that certainly doesn't sound dodgy in any way or form. Yeah. Yeah. My last question is actually a really simple one. What do you hope to see happen next? Well, I think it's a simple one. It's probably got a complicated answer.
Geez, Paul, that's a difficult question.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the community is tired at the moment. We've just been whacked around for, basically since this government came into office. They've been giving us a good whack around, and it's just really it's really tough. I think. I mean, we haven't even talked about the Royal Commission. I mean, that's an episode all to itself. So I think I'm going to be really interested to see how this government delivers the apology, because we haven't even mentioned that MSD is a named organisation in the Royal Commission. So we're going to get to November, and the government is going to have to deliver an apology to disabled people. So I feel like if we can get to November and have a moment of healing around that, I think that will be really useful for us. But I feel like there has been a significant erosion of trust with disabled people with this particular government. And I feel like it's really incumbent on this government to really work very, very hard now to build that trust up, because the trust was very low anyway, and they've just taken some significant steps to continue to erode that trust, and I feel like they've got to take the steps now to rebuild that trust. Otherwise, yeah, I'm really, really worried about what will happen, just in terms of disabled people's trust in government as a big G. Because if we have a loss of trust in government, then I'm, because our reliance on government services, health, housing, education, MS, payments is quite significant. It's more so than almost any other community. So we need to trust government, and at the moment it's very, very low, and I feel like there needs to be a rebuilding of that trust. And hopefully the Royal Commission will start to rebuild that, but it's really on this government now to really step up and start with trust building exercises, because if they don't, then we could just completely lose trust.
My closing comment would be that my worry is that if the government does switch back in 2026, Labour are going to have a hell of a lot of work to clean up. And my worry is, can they clean it up? Like, in 3 years? I don't know. I'm dubious. It's possible. I don't know.
I would love to see National step up, provide some proper leadership, say to ACT, actually, you know what? Your positions and your policies are detrimental to New Zealand people. They are causing immense harm, and we are not going to allow you to do that anymore. And there are lots of ways that National could do that. And there are lots of ways that National could partner with other parties in order to prevent the incredible harm that ACT is doing. As long as National goes along with what ACT is saying and doing and wanting, National will be tarred with the same brush. And if they want to avoid that, they need to do something about it now.
Yeah. My worry with that is, though, that if they do that, then the ACT Party will say, okay, we don't want any more part of this. Bye, see you later, and we have an early election.
Early election, bring on the left-wing government, baby!
Kind of election
Yeah.
out. It went from local body to central government, and then there's been like a whole bunch of by-elections, and then the Tauranga election, and I'm kind of liking like a month without elections. It's quiet.
Oh wow! We've
I
got
mean,
all that fun coming up with the by-election, with the local body elections. Yeah.
One can but dream.
Actually, that's probably a really interesting perspective as well, because obviously when you're dealing with councils and local body facilities for people with disabilities, how much sort of pressure do you think people should be putting onto councils as well to make sure that they're working with central government here to make sure that the needs are being met for the community in very different ways from different providers?
Well, you just opened up a big Pandora's box there,
Okay.
Paul. Because one of my I could seriously go on about this for a day or two. In one of my former lives, I chaired an advisory group to a local to a council. We need serious fundamental reform of how we do disability in local government, because at the moment we're just not doing it properly. Our councils don't recognise any form of legislation that relates to disability at all. that they're completely governed by the Local Government Act, which is what they're meant to do, but there's nothing in the Local Government Act that relates to disability. So we're completely reliant upon the kindness of elected members, and sometimes they're not very kind. Just put it politely. So we need fundamental reform at the structural level, at the legislative level, so that we can bring in the UN CRPD, which is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, down to local government. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I could talk about this for a very, very long time, because it's. I mean, the really serious point is that local governments impact disabled people actually far more often than central government, because we're talking about footpaths, we're talking about public transport, we're talking about toilets, we're talking about the really important stuff, and councils just are not taking it seriously, because they don't have the right levers, and yeah. So again, another episode. Love to talk about it, but my goodness, yeah. And they don't have enough money, So that's a whole nother thing as well. Yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, look,
it's a whole other thing.
I'm in Hamilton as my local council, and we have Councillor Bidder who used some incredibly offensive to say, yes,
He's a
that
fucking
Andrew
moron.
Bidder.
I can't even think of a nice way to describe him. He's a fucking moron.
It's horrific.
He's a nasty
And
piece
the
of work.
worst thing, it gets worse. So we've put in, several people put in complaints, including myself. There was a formal investigation. They decided, yes, he breached the code. There is literally nothing they can do about it. They cannot fire him. They cannot get rid of him. They cannot penalise him. There is nothing that can be done. I'm like, oh, for crying out loud, that's just ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. It's a major flaw in the legislation, and the review for the future in local government that was done last year actually had in there a suggestion for levers that they could pull, like an independent commission that can investigate any council that has those kind of issues pop up. And Simeon Brown was just like, nah, Labor did it, so it's bad.
Oh, out loud. Right.
Yeah. I know. But hopefully David's not there after Andrew's not there after the next election in Hamilton, because
who knows?
He's
We've got some. Yeah, he's very unpleasant.
Yes. Yeah. Right. I think I'm out of questions. I haven't had any major new questions pop up in the chat. So yeah, anything left from you, Blake? Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Right. I'm going to introduce the news. Nick and Bex, thank you very much for joining us tonight. It has been really appreciated and a fantastic conversation. For people that are watching, don't forget we've still got an interview coming up with Shannon Halbert and Carmel Cepoloni as well, where we do actually talk a little bit about local council reform, particularly around the Māori wards and what Labour is kind of edging to do with changes, because they're really cognizant of the fact that the councils are being forced to have these referendum on Māori wards, and it's going to cost them money. And if Labour comes in and suddenly goes, well, no, we'll just change everything, it's going to, what a waste of money. So yeah, so that conversation will be coming up shortly. Rebekah and Nick, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot. I really enjoyed that. Thank you.